The rhythm of the butter churn had become as familiar to Katherine Norton as her own heartbeat. And on this particular morning in late September of 1878, she worked the wooden dasher through cream, while stars still dotted the New Mexico sky above Tucumcari. She had risen at 4, as always, because the work of running a boarding house never ended, and butter made fresh before breakfast brought the kind of satisfaction that made the ache in her shoulders worthwhile. The lamplight from the kitchen window spilled across the packed earth of the yard, creating a small golden circle in the pre-dawn darkness, and she hummed softly to herself, thinking of nothing in particular except perhaps how she needed to check the henhouse later, and whether the bread dough had risen enough. She did not hear the footsteps approaching until they were quite close, and when she looked up, startled, she found herself face to face with a tall figure silhouetted against the gradually lightening eastern horizon. Her hand instinctively went to the rifle she kept propped against the porch rail, but the man raised his hand slowly, palms out. "Easy there, miss," he said, his voice low and rough with what sounded like exhaustion. "I mean no harm, just passing through and saw your light. Been riding since yesterday morning, and my horse threw a shoe about 2 miles back. Wondering if you might know where I could find a blacksmith when the sun comes up." Katherine kept her hand near the rifle but did not grab it. In the growing light, she could make out more details now. He was perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes were dusty from travel, and he carried himself with the easy stance of a man who spent more time in the saddle than on foot. A cowboy, then, probably working one of the ranches that dotted the territory. "Blacksmith opens at 7, she said, keeping her voice steady. "That is his shop down the main road, 3rd building on the right. You cannot miss it." The man nodded his thanks but did not immediately leave. Instead, his eyes drifted to the butter churn, and something in his expression softened. "My mother used to do that," he said quietly. "Before dawn, just like you. Said it was the only time of day that belonged to her alone." Katherine felt some of her wariness ease. There was genuine memory in his voice, not threat. "It is peaceful," she admitted, "and the butter sets better when the air is still cool." He was quiet for a moment, watching the steady up and down motion of her arms as she worked the dasher. Then he said something that would change the entire course of her life, though she could not have known it then. "Churn a future with me, too." The words hung in the air between them, strange and unexpected and so forward that Katherine should have been offended. But there was no mockery in his tone, no crude suggestion. Instead, there was something almost wistful, a longing that seemed to surprise even him. "I beg your pardon," Katherine said, her hand stilling on the churn. The man seemed to realize what he had said, and even in the dim light she could see color rising in his face. "I apologize, miss. That came out wrong. I have been on the trail too long, I think, and my manners have suffered for it. What I meant to say, I suppose, is that watching you work there, so content and peaceful, it made me think that a man could do worse than to find a woman who knows the value of an honest morning's labor. Made me think about the kind of future I have been riding toward all these years." He cleared his throat, clearly embarrassed. "I will leave you to your work. Thank you for the information about the blacksmith." He turned to go, but Katherine found herself speaking before she quite knew what she was doing. "Have you eaten?" He stopped, turned back. "Not since yesterday noon." "The boarding house does not open for breakfast until 6, but I always make extra. You could wait on the porch if you like. I will bring something out when it is ready." She could not have said why she made the offer. Katherine Norton was not in the habit of inviting strange men to breakfast, even on her porch. But something in his words had touched her, perhaps because they echoed thoughts she had been having herself lately. She was 24 years old, had been running this boarding house alone since her father died 2 years ago, and sometimes the loneliness of it settled over her like a heavy blanket. "That is mighty kind of you, miss," he said. "My name is Daniel Zimmerman. I work for the Triple J Ranch about 30 miles south of here." "Katherine Norton," she replied. "You can call me Kate." And that was how it began, in the purple twilight before dawn, with butter slowly forming in a wooden churn and a cowboy who said strange, beautiful things he claimed not to mean. Daniel Zimmerman settled himself on the porch steps while Katherine finished the butter and went inside to prepare breakfast. She could feel him there through the wall, a presence that made her oddly self-conscious as she sliced bread and fried eggs and salt pork. She was used to feeding men, the boarders who came and went, the occasional traveler who paid for a meal, but this felt different somehow. More personal. When she brought the plate out, the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. Daniel stood as she approached, taking the plate with a grateful nod. "Much obliged, Miss Kate," he said, and his eyes met hers for a moment before he looked away. She had intended to go back inside, to let him eat in peace while she prepared for her regular boarders. But instead, she found herself sitting down on the porch rail, coffee cup in hand, watching him eat with the focused attention of a truly hungry man. "You said you work at the Triple J," she said after a moment. "What brings you to Tucumcari?" He swallowed, wiped his mouth. "Boss sent me to buy breeding stock. There is a man here, Martin Pierce, who raises Herefords, supposed to have some of the best cattle in the territory." He paused. "Truth is, I was meant to arrive yesterday, but I took my time on the road. Not in any hurry to get back, I suppose." "You do not like your work." "I like it fine," Daniel said. "It is good work, honest work. But it gets lonely sometimes, being out on the range with nothing but cattle and the occasional coyote for company. Makes a man think too much." Katherine understood that. She had done plenty of thinking herself in the 2 years since her father's death, standing at this very churn or kneading bread dough or changing bed linens, thinking about what her life had become, what it might have been, what it still could be. "What do you think about?" she asked. Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw intelligence in his eyes and sadness and something else she could not quite name. "I think about having something to come home to besides an empty bunkhouse," he said quietly. "I think about building something that lasts. I am 28 years old, Miss Kate, and I have been working cattle since I was 14. I have saved my money, learned the business, and I am a good hand. But sometimes I wake up and wonder what it is all for, if at the end of the day there is no one to share it with." The honesty of it took her breath away. Men did not usually talk like this, not the ones she knew. They kept their feelings locked up tight, hidden behind gruffness or jokes or silence. But here was Daniel Zimmerman, a stranger she had known for less than an hour, speaking truths that resonated in her own heart. "I know something of that feeling," she admitted. "This boarding house keeps me busy from dawn until well past dark most days, but busy is not the same as fulfilled. My father always said I would find a good man and have a family of my own, but the years pass and here I still am, alone." "You never married." "There was a man once," Katherine said, surprised at herself for sharing this. "Thomas Weatherby. We were engaged, planned to marry in the spring of '76. But he got gold fever, decided to try his luck in the Black Hills, said he would come back rich enough to give me everything I deserved." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I received a letter 6 months later from his brother. Thomas had been killed in a mining accident." "I am sorry," Daniel said, and the simple sincerity of it was more comforting than any elaborate condolence could have been. "It was a long time ago," Katherine said, "though sometimes it felt like yesterday. I grieved, And then I kept going because that is what you do. My father needed me here, and then he fell ill, and by the time he passed, running this place alone seemed to be my fate. Do you want it to be? The question caught her off guard. Did she want this life? She had never really asked herself that. It had simply been what needed doing, one day after another, each so much like the last that they blurred together. I want to matter to someone, she said finally. I want to build something with someone, not just for someone or by myself. Does that make sense? More sense than anything else I have heard in a good long while, Daniel said. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the sun now fully above the horizon, painting everything in warm morning light. From inside the boarding house, Katherine heard stirring. Her guests would be waking soon, expecting breakfast, and she had work to do. I should go in, she said reluctantly. Daniel stood, handed her the empty plate. Thank you for the meal, Miss Kate. It was the best breakfast I have had in longer than I can remember, and not just because of the food. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. Will you be staying in town long? Depends on how negotiations go with Pierce. Could be a day or two, could be longer if he drives a hard bargain. He hesitated, then added, I wonder if I might call on you again. Properly, I mean. Maybe take you to dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening, if you would be willing. Katherine knew she should be cautious. She knew nothing about this man except what he had told her, and words were easy to speak. But something in her heart, the part that had been quiet for so long, urged her to take a chance. I would like that, she said. The smile that broke across Daniel's face transformed him, made him look younger and almost boyish despite the stubble and trail dust. 6 o'clock tomorrow, then. I promise I will clean up better than this. 6 o'clock, Katherine agreed. She watched him walk away toward the town's main street, leading his limping horse, and only when he was out of sight did she realize she was smiling. Really smiling, for the first time in what felt like forever. The rest of the day passed in a blur of familiar tasks. Katherine fed her boarders, cleaned rooms, did laundry, prepared lunch and then dinner, took payment from a departing guest and welcomed a new one, a traveling salesman who complained about the heat and the dust and everything else he could think of. She bore it all with her usual patience, but underneath her efficient movements, her mind kept returning to Daniel Zimmerman and his strange, beautiful words, "Churn a future with me too." That evening, after the dishes were washed and her boarders had retreated to their rooms, Katherine sat on the porch with her mending and allowed herself to think about what such a future might look like. She had grown so accustomed to being alone that the idea of partnership seemed almost foreign now. What would it be like to have someone to talk to at the end of a long day? To share the burdens and joys of daily life? To wake up beside someone who knew her, truly knew her, not just as the woman who provided clean sheets and hot meals. She thought of Thomas sometimes still. But if she was honest with herself, that had been a girl's love, built more on hope and imagination than real understanding. They had known each other since childhood, and their engagement had felt inevitable rather than chosen. She had cared for him, certainly, but she had never felt the spark of recognition she had experienced this morning with Daniel, that sense of meeting someone who understood the shape of her loneliness, because it matched his own. But she was getting ahead of herself, Katherine thought firmly. One breakfast and one dinner invitation did not make a future. Daniel Zimmerman might turn out to be nothing like the man he had seemed in those quiet morning hours. Or he might be exactly as he seemed, but decide upon reflection that a boarding house keeper in Tucumcari was not what he wanted after all. The only way to find out was to show up at 6 o'clock tomorrow and see what happened next. Katherine went to bed that night with a flutter of anticipation in her stomach that felt both wonderful and terrifying. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of the boarding house settling around her, and wondered if this was the beginning of something new or just a brief interruption in the steady rhythm of her days. The next day seemed determined to test her patience. One of her boarders, an elderly man named Fletcher who had been living in her smallest room for the past 3 months, woke with a fever and needed tending. The salesman complained that his eggs were too runny, then later that his room was too hot. A pipe burst in the washroom, flooding the floor and requiring immediate attention. Through it all, Katherine maintained her composure, but by 4 o'clock she was exhausted and wondering if she should send word to Daniel that she needed to postpone their dinner. But no, she thought as she mopped up the last of the water from the washroom floor. She had been postponing her own life for 2 years now, always putting the boarding house first, and where had it gotten her? If she wanted things to change, she had to be willing to make changes. At 4:30, she asked Mrs. Chen, the Chinese woman who sometimes helped with laundry and cooking, if she could mind the house for a few hours that evening. Mrs. Chen, whose English was limited but whose understanding was sharp, took one look at Katherine's face and nodded with a knowing smile. "You go," she said. "I take care, you need time for you." Katherine could have hugged her. Instead, she pressed payment into Mrs. Chen's hand, more than the work warranted, and hurried upstairs to make herself presentable. She had few nice dresses, her life not requiring much in the way of finery. But she had one good blue calico that her father had bought her for her 23rd birthday. She put it on now, brushed out her dark hair and pinned it up carefully, and allowed herself a small application of the rose salve that served as both lip color and cheek tint. Looking at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. When had she last dressed for someone other than herself? When had she last cared what she looked like? At precisely 6 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Katherine descended the stairs with her heart hammering, feeling foolishly like a young girl at her first social, and opened the door to find Daniel Zimmerman transformed. He had indeed cleaned up, his hair trimmed and his face freshly shaven, wearing clean clothes and a string tie that looked new. But more than his appearance, it was the look in his eyes when he saw her that made Katherine's breath catch. He looked at her like she was something precious, something worth dressing up for. "Miss Kate," he said softly, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," she managed. "You look very nice yourself." He offered his arm and she took it, allowing him to escort her down the street toward the hotel. Tucumcari was not a large town, and she was aware of curious eyes watching them from windows and doorways. There would be talk tomorrow, she knew. The boarding house keeper stepping out with a strange cowboy. Let them talk. She was tired of living her life according to other people's expectations. The hotel restaurant was the nicest establishment in town, with real tablecloths and china plates. Daniel held her chair for her, and they sat across from each other in the lamplight while a server brought them water and menus. "I met with Pierce today," Daniel said after they had ordered. "Spent most of the day looking at cattle and arguing price. We finally came to terms about an hour ago. I will be taking 20 head back to the ranch, leaving day after tomorrow." Katherine felt a stab of disappointment. So soon. "That is good," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I hope the cattle are worth the journey." "They are fine animals," Daniel agreed. "But truth be told, Miss Kate, the cattle are not the most valuable thing I found in Tucumcari." She looked up, met his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I cannot stop thinking about what I said to you yesterday morning," Daniel said, his voice low and intense. "I know it was forward. I know it was strange, but I meant it. There was something about watching you work in the dawn light, so capable and peaceful and real, that made me feel like I had found what I had been looking for without even knowing I was searching." You do not know me, Katherine said, though her heart was racing. We met yesterday. You cannot know if you feel that way based on one conversation. You are right, Daniel said. I do not know your favorite color or what makes you laugh or whether you prefer summer or winter. I do not know if you sing in the church choir or if you can ride a horse or 100 other little details. But I know the important things, Kate. I know you work hard and take pride in it. I know you are kind enough to feed a stranger and brave enough to live alone in a rough territory. I know that when you talk about wanting to build something with someone, I understand exactly what you mean because I want the same thing. The server arrived with their food, interrupting the moment, but the weight of Daniel's words hung between them. Katherine picked up her fork, not sure she could eat, her stomach too full of butterflies. I want that too, she said quietly. But wanting something and having it are different things. You live 30 miles south of here, working at a ranch. I have a boarding house to run. How would that even work? I have been thinking about that all day, Daniel admitted. And I will be honest with you, Kate. I do not have all the answers, but I have been saving my money for 5 years now, putting away every spare dollar. I have enough to buy land of my own, start a small ranch. Not anything big or fancy, but enough to build a life on. And Tucumcari is growing. New people are coming to the territory every month. A good boarding house in a growing town, that is a valuable thing. Are you proposing something? Katherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. I am saying that I know this is fast, maybe too fast, and you have every right to tell me I am crazy. But I am 28 years old and I have been waiting for something to feel right, and this feels right. You feel right. So what I am proposing, I suppose, is that we take a chance on each other. That we see if this feeling is real or just two lonely people finding comfort in each other's company. And if it is real, Katherine asked, then I will buy land here near Tucumcari and we will build that future together. Cattle and boarding house, butter churned before dawn and someone to come home to at night. All of it. Katherine set down her fork, her hands trembling slightly. This was madness. Sensible Katherine Norton did not make life-changing decisions based on feelings. She planned, she considered, she weighed the practical realities. But when had being sensible ever made her happy? I think you might be crazy, she said slowly. But I think I might be crazy too because I want to say yes. I want to take that chance. The smile that broke across Daniel's face was like sunrise. He reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. Then we are crazy together, he said. And maybe that is the sanest thing either of us has done in a long time. They ate their dinner in a state of giddy disbelief, talking about everything and nothing, learning those little details that Daniel had mentioned. Katherine's favorite color was green, the color of spring growth. Daniel preferred summer, but not the hottest part, those long evenings when the heat finally broke. She could not sing to save her life, which made him laugh because he could not either. He could ride anything with 4 legs, and she admitted that horses made her nervous, though she could handle a buggy team well enough. The more they talked, the more Katherine felt the rightness of it settling into her bones. This was not like her engagement to Thomas, built on childhood familiarity and social expectation. This was something else entirely, a recognition of kindred spirits, 2 people who had been lonely in the same way and who now saw the possibility of not being lonely anymore. When Daniel walked her home that evening, they stood together on the porch where they had first met, and the stars wheeled overhead in the vast New Mexico sky. I leave day after tomorrow, Daniel said, still holding her hand. But I will be back within 2 weeks. I need to give notice at the Triple J, collect my pay, settle my affairs. Then I will come back and we will start looking at land together, if that is still what you want. "It is what I want," Katherine said firmly. "But Daniel, 2 weeks is not very long. What if we change our minds? What if this is just the excitement of something new?" "Then we will know that too," Daniel said. "But I will not change my mind, Kate. I am certain of that." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently, and the gesture was so sweet and old-fashioned that Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes. Then he released her hand and stepped back. "Good night, Kate. Thank you for taking a chance on a crazy cowboy." "Good night, Daniel. Thank you for asking me to." She watched him walk away into the darkness, and then she went inside, where Mrs. Chen was dozing in the kitchen chair. Katherine paid her again and thanked her profusely, then climbed the stairs to her room in a daze. That night, she barely slept. Her mind raced with possibilities and plans, worries and hopes all tangled together. What if she was making a terrible mistake? What if Daniel had second thoughts once he was away from her? What if she was risking everything she had built for a dream that would never materialize? But what if it did? What if this was her chance at the life she had always wanted but never quite believed she could have? The next morning, Katherine rose early as always and went out to churn butter in the pre-dawn darkness. But this time, as she worked the dasher up and down, she was not thinking about the boarding house or her endless tasks. She was thinking about Daniel's words, about churning a future together, and she smiled into the darkness. He came by that morning to say goodbye, his horse sound again and loaded with supplies for the return journey. They stood in the yard, neither quite knowing what to say, all the important words having already been spoken. 2 weeks, Daniel said. "I promise." "I will be here," Katherine replied. He looked like he wanted to kiss her, and she wanted him to, but instead he just squeezed her hand once, mounted his horse and rode away, turning back once to wave before disappearing around the bend in the road. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Katherine's life. She threw herself into her work, scrubbing floors that were already clean, reorganizing cupboards that needed no organizing, anything to keep busy and not watch the calendar. Her boarders noticed the change in her but were too polite or too uninterested to comment, except for old Mr. Fletcher, who had recovered from his fever and who said one morning, "You are waiting for someone, Miss Kate. I can always tell when a woman is waiting. Is it that obvious?" Katherine asked, embarrassed. "Only to those who know to look," Fletcher said kindly. "I hope he is worthy of you, whoever he is." "So do I," Katherine admitted. On the 10th day she received a letter. It was brief, but it made her heart sore. "Miss Kate, everything is settled here. I have given notice and will leave the Triple J in 3 days. I am bringing my savings and my hopes and my heart, all of which belong to you now if you will still have them. I think of you every morning at dawn. Yours, Daniel Zimmerman." Katherine read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and tucked it into her bodice, close to her heart. 3 more days, maybe 4 depending on the weather and the condition of the roads. She could wait 3 more days. On the afternoon of the 14th day, Katherine was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard the sound of horses in the yard. Her heart leapt, but she forced herself to walk calmly to the window, not run. But when she looked out and saw Daniel dismounting, leading not just his own horse but a small string of pack animals, all her calm deserted her. She ran out the door and across the yard, and he caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "You came back," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I said I would," Daniel replied, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "Did you doubt me?" "Every day," Katherine admitted, "and not at all, both at the same time." He laughed at that, a deep, joyful sound. "I have so much to tell you. I saw 3 pieces of land on the way here that might work, one in particular that is perfect. Good water, decent grazing, close enough to town for you to keep the boarding house if you want or far enough to start fresh if you prefer. And Kate, I brought something for you." He released her and went to one of the pack horses, rummaging in a saddlebag before turning back with a small box in his hand. Katherine's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small blue stone. "It is not much," Daniel said, suddenly shy. "But it was my grandmother's, the only thing of value my mother had to give me before she died. She said to save it for the woman I wanted to spend my life with." He took a breath, then dropped to one knee right there in the yard. "Katherine Norton, I know we have not known each other long, but I am more sure of this than I have been of anything in my life. Will you marry me? Will you build that future with me?" Katherine looked down at him, this cowboy who had appeared out of the darkness 2 weeks ago and said such strange, beautiful things. And she knew that her answer had been yes from the very beginning, maybe from that first moment, when he had watched her churn butter and seen not just a woman working but a future worth having. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, Daniel Zimmerman, I will marry you." He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he did what they had both wanted from the start. He kissed her, gentle and reverent at first, then deeper as she responded, and Katherine felt something inside her that had been closed for so long finally open. This was what she had been waiting for, not just romance or companionship, but this bone-deep certainty that she had found her match, her partner, the person she was meant to walk through life with. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, they found that they had an audience. Several of Katherine's boarders had come out to see what the commotion was about, and old Mr. Fletcher was grinning from ear to ear. "Well, it is about time," he said. "Congratulations to you both." That evening, after the boarders had been fed and had returned to their rooms with strict instructions not to disturb, unless the building was on fire, Katherine and Daniel sat together on the porch and made plans. They decided to marry quickly, within the week if they could arrange it with the circuit preacher who would be passing through Tucumcari in a few days. Daniel had already put a deposit on the piece of land he had mentioned, pending Katherine's approval, and they agreed to ride out the next day to see it together. "What about the boarding house?" Katherine asked. "I cannot just abandon my guests." "We will figure it out," Daniel said. "Maybe hire someone to run it for you until we decide what to do long term, or sell it if you want to start completely fresh. Whatever you choose, we will make it work." "It feels strange to think about leaving it," Katherine admitted. "This has been my whole life for so long." "Your life is bigger than these walls now," Daniel said, taking her hand. "As big as we want to make it." 3 days later, on a sunny afternoon with the cottonwoods beginning to turn gold along the creek, Katherine Norton married Daniel Zimmerman in a simple ceremony at the church. Mrs. Chen stood up with Katherine, and Daniel's witness was a cowboy friend who had ridden up from the Triple J for the occasion. Katherine wore her blue calico dress and carried wildflowers that Daniel had picked that morning, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, she felt like her heart might burst with happiness. They spent their wedding night in Katherine's room above the boarding house, which felt both familiar and entirely new with Daniel beside her. He was gentle and patient, and when Katherine woke the next morning wrapped in his arms, she thought that this must be what contentment felt like, this sense of rightness and peace and possibility all at once. Over the following weeks, they settled into a new rhythm. Katherine continued to run the boarding house with Daniel's help, and together they rode out to look at the land he had found. It was everything he had promised. A beautiful stretch of grassland with a creek running through it, and a stand of cottonwoods that would provide shade for a house. They walked the property together, and Daniel pointed out where he envisioned building not just a house but a whole life. "Corrals here," A barn there, a vegetable garden close to the house where Katherine could grow tomatoes and beans and squash. We could keep the boarding house going too, Daniel said. Hire a manager, let it provide steady income while we build up the ranch. Between cattle and boarders, we would have a solid foundation. Katherine loved him for saying we, for never once suggesting that she simply give up everything she had worked for. Together they interviewed candidates and found a capable widow named Mrs. Sarah Mitchell, who was looking for both employment and a place to live. Sarah was efficient and no-nonsense, and Katherine felt comfortable turning over the daily operations to her while remaining the owner. By November, they had broken ground on their house, a simple 4-room structure that would be enough to start with. Daniel hired carpenters from town, and Katherine spent her days dividing her time between supervising construction and helping Sarah transition into managing the boarding house. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and every night she fell into bed beside Daniel too tired to think, but happy in a way she had never imagined possible. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow and cold that slowed construction, but gave Katherine and Daniel more time together. They spent long evenings by the fire in their temporary quarters, a small cabin on the property that had belonged to the previous owner, talking about their plans and dreams. Daniel taught Katherine to play poker, and she taught him to bake bread, and they laughed at how bad they each were at the other's skill. One night in late December, as snow fell softly outside their window, Daniel asked Katherine what she wanted most for their future. "Children," she said without hesitation. "I want to fill that new house with children and noise and life. I want to teach them to churn butter before dawn and to work hard and to find someone they love as much as I love you." Daniel pulled her close, his hand resting on her flat stomach. "How many children?" "As many as we are blessed with," Katherine said. 2 or 3 or 6, however many want to come. "Then we will make room for all of them," Daniel promised. Spring brought new growth and new hope. The house was finished in April, and they moved in with much celebration, their few pieces of furniture looking lost in the empty rooms but full of potential. Katherine painted the walls white and hung curtains she had sewn herself, and Daniel built furniture in the evenings. A table, chairs, a cradle that sat empty but waiting. The cradle did not wait long. In May, Katherine realized she had missed her monthly courses, and by June there was no doubt. She was pregnant, due to deliver sometime in January. Daniel received the news with such joy that he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, just as he had that first day when he returned to Tucumcari. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from terrible sickness in the mornings, and the summer heat made her swollen ankles ache. But through it all, Daniel was there, bringing her cool water and rubbing her feet and never once complaining about having to take over more of the physical labor of running the ranch. They had bought cattle in the spring, just 10 head to start, and Daniel proved to be as capable as he had claimed. He worked from before dawn until after dusk, building fences and digging a well and doing the 1,000 tasks required to turn raw land into a working ranch. Katherine helped where she could, but as her belly grew, Daniel insisted she rest more. "You are building a person," he said when she protested. "That is more important than any fence." In September, they received word that Mrs. Chen had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Katherine grieved the loss of the kind woman who had helped her take a chance on love, and she and Daniel attended the funeral together, standing with the small Chinese community in Tucumcari and paying their respects. That evening, Katherine suggested they name their child after Mrs. Chen if it was a girl. Her name was May, Katherine said. "It means beautiful," She told me once. May Zimmerman, Daniel said, trying it out. I like it. And if it is a boy, they debated names for weeks but finally settled on James after Daniel's father, who had died when Daniel was young. James or May Zimmerman, either way, a future being built one day at a time. Winter arrived again, and with it came the waiting. Katherine grew larger and more uncomfortable, and Daniel grew more nervous, fussing over her constantly. In mid-January, on a night when the moon was full and bright over the snow-covered land, Katherine's pains began. Daniel rode for the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, who arrived within an hour and took over with calm efficiency. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but finally, just as the sun was setting on January 15th, 1880, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Daniel was allowed in once the baby had been cleaned and wrapped, and Katherine would never forget the look on his face when Mrs. Patterson placed their son in his arms. He cried, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, and when he looked at Katherine, there was such love and gratitude in his eyes that she felt tears of her own. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for this, for him, for all of it." "Hello, James," Katherine said softly, reaching out to touch her son's tiny hand. "Welcome to your future." They settled into the exhausting chaos of new parenthood, taking turns walking the floor with a fussy baby, learning to function on very little sleep, and discovering reserves of patience they had not known they possessed. But even in the hardest moments, Katherine felt profoundly grateful. This was what she had wanted, what they had both wanted, this messy, beautiful, everyday life built together. James was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. He grew quickly, and by spring he was smiling and reaching for things, fascinated by the world around him. Daniel would take him out to the corrals and show him the cattle, talking to his son about the ranch as if the baby could understand every word. "You are going to teach him everything," Katherine said one evening, watching Daniel and James together. "I am going to try," Daniel said. "I want him to know how to work hard and be honest and treat people with respect. I want him to know that his mother is the bravest, strongest woman I have ever met, and that is the kind of woman he should look for when he is old enough to think about such things." "That is a long way off yet," Katherine said, laughing. "He is only 4 months old." "I know, but it will go fast," Daniel said, and he was right. The years did go fast. James learned to walk and talk, became a bright, curious child who wanted to help with everything. Katherine became pregnant again when James was 2, and this time she carried the baby with less difficulty. In November of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter whom they named May, as they had planned. May was different from James, quieter and more observant, with a stubborn streak that reminded Daniel of Katherine. She adored her older brother, and James took his role as big brother seriously, always making sure May was safe and included in his games. The ranch grew along with the family. They added more cattle, built a bigger barn, and hired occasional help during busy seasons. The boarding house in town continued to do well under Mrs. Mitchell's management, providing a steady income that allowed them to expand their operations. By 1885, they had nearly 50 head of cattle and were considered a successful, if still modest, ranch. Katherine still rose before dawn most days, though now she was making breakfast for her family rather than churning butter for boarders. Sometimes Daniel would join her in the kitchen, and they would work side by side in comfortable silence, preparing for the day ahead. In those quiet moments, Katherine would think back to that morning in September of 1878, when a tired cowboy had appeared out of the darkness and said words that changed her life. "Churn a future with me too." They had churned that future together, and it was richer and fuller than anything Katherine had imagined possible. It was not always easy. There were hard winters when cattle died and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, and the constant worry that came with raising children and animals in a territory that could be harsh and unforgiving. But through it all, they had each other, and that made everything bearable. In the spring of 1886, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This third pregnancy was harder than the previous two, perhaps because she was older now, 32 and feeling it. But when their second daughter was born in December, tiny and perfect with a full head of red hair that surprised everyone, Katherine knew the difficulty had been worth it. They named her Clara after Daniel's mother, and she was a joy from the start, a happy baby who laughed easily and brought light into their home even in the depths of winter. James, now 6, was thrilled to have another sister, and May, at 4, loved having a baby to fuss over. The house that had seemed so large when they moved in now felt just right, full of noise and life and love. Katherine and Daniel added on to it, building 2 more rooms to give the children more space as they grew. The ranch continued to prosper, and by the time Clara was walking, they had nearly 100 head of cattle and had earned a reputation for quality stock. Life fell into a pattern, the rhythms of seasons and growth, of births and deaths, of ordinary days that somehow added up to an extraordinary life. Katherine watched her children grow, taught them to read and write at the kitchen table, to work hard and be kind, to value family above all else. Daniel taught them to ride and rope, to respect the land and animals in their care, to keep their word and stand by their principles. On a morning in September of 1890, exactly 12 years after that first meeting, Katherine woke before dawn as always. Daniel was already up, she realized, and she found him on the porch, watching the eastern sky begin to lighten. "Could not sleep?" she asked, joining him. "Just thinking," Daniel said, putting his arm around her. "About how far we have come." Katherine leaned into him, comfortable and content. "It has been a good 12 years. The best," Daniel agreed. "Sometimes I think about that morning when I saw you churning butter, and I cannot believe I was brave enough to say what I said." "Churn a future with me too," Katherine quoted softly. "The smartest words I ever spoke," Daniel said, though I did not know it at the time. They stood together in the peaceful darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch waking up around them, cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering in the corral, the rooster beginning to crow. Inside the house, they could hear the children beginning to stir, James's voice and then May's, Clara's laugh. "We should go in," Katherine said. "They will be wanting breakfast." "In a minute," Daniel said. "I want to stand here with you just a little longer." So they stood together and watched the sun rise over the land they had built their life on, over the house where their children slept, over the future they had churned together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. And Katherine thought that this, right here, was what happiness looked like. Not perfect or without struggle, but real and earned and worth every moment. The years continued to pass in that bittersweet way they do, bringing joy and sorrow in equal measure. Old Mr. Fletcher passed away in 1891, leaving Katherine his few possessions and a note thanking her for her kindness all those years ago. Mrs. Mitchell retired in 1893, and Katherine and Daniel decided to sell the boarding house rather than find a new manager. The sale brought enough money to significantly expand the ranch, and they bought adjacent land, doubling their holdings. James grew into a fine young man, tall and capable like his father, with a good head for business and a gentle way with animals. May was quiet but strong-willed, showing an artistic talent that surprised her parents when she began drawing the landscape and animals with remarkable skill. Clara was the wild one, always climbing trees and racing horses, and giving her parents heart attacks with her fearless nature. In 1898, when Katherine was 44 and thought her childbearing years were behind her, she discovered she was pregnant one more time. This pregnancy was difficult from the start, and Daniel worried constantly, hovering over her until she finally told him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I have done this 3 times before," she reminded him. "I know what I am doing." But privately, Katherine worried too. She was older now, and the pregnancy took a toll on her body in ways the previous ones had not. When her labor began in early April of 1899, it was intense and frightening, and for a time the midwife was concerned they might lose both mother and child. But Katherine was strong, had always been strong, and she fought through the pain and fear to bring her 4th child into the world. A son, small but healthy, with a lusty cry that filled the room with relief. They named him Thomas, after Katherine's first love, a way of honoring the past while celebrating the future. Daniel held his new son with the same wonder he had shown with James nearly 20 years before, and Katherine thought that some things never changed, that capacity for love and amazement never wore out. Thomas was the baby of the family, doted on by his older siblings and parents alike. He was a happy, easy child, quick to smile and laugh, and he brought new life to the ranch just when Katherine had been feeling her age. The turn of the century came and went, 1899 becoming 1900, and the Zimmerman family stood together and marveled at living in a new century. James was nearly 20 now, talking about courting a girl from town named Lucy Davies. May was 17, still drawing and painting, quietly beautiful in a way that reminded Daniel of Katherine when they first met. Clara was 13 and still wild, though beginning to show signs of the woman she would become. And Thomas was a bright toddler, into everything and delighting them all. Katherine was 46 now, her dark hair showing threads of silver, her face lined from years of sun and wind and smiling. But when Daniel looked at her, he still saw the woman who had churned butter in the darkness, who had taken a chance on a crazy cowboy with nothing but dreams and determination. "You are staring," Katherine said one evening, catching him watching her as she darned socks by lamplight. "I am admiring," Daniel corrected. "There is a difference." "Admiring what?" "A middle-aged woman with darning." "Admiring the woman who made all of this possible," Daniel said. "The woman who said yes when she should have said I was crazy. The woman who built a life with me that is better than anything I imagined." Katherine set down her darning and went to him, settling onto his lap despite her protests that she was too old and heavy for such things. "We built it together," she said. "That was the whole point, was it not?" "Building it together, it was," Daniel agreed. "And we did a damned fine job of it, if I say so myself." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their home around them. Upstairs, they could hear James moving about in his room, probably writing another letter to Lucy. May's room was quiet, as it usually was, the girl content with her own company and her drawings. Clara and Thomas were already asleep, exhausted from a day of chasing chickens and playing in the barn. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked quietly. "Staying in Tucumcari instead of moving on?" "You always talked about seeing more of the territory." "Not for a single moment," Daniel said firmly. "Everything I wanted to see I found right here, in this house, in our children, in you. I have traveled further sitting on this porch with you than I ever could have riding across the territory alone." It was the kind of thing Daniel said sometimes, those strange, beautiful statements that had first caught Katherine's heart. She leaned her head against his shoulder and breathed in the familiar smell of him, leather and sage and home. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Daniel replied. Every day more than the last. The spring of 1901 brought change to the Zimmerman household. James, now 21, married his Lucy in a ceremony at the church in Tucumcari. And Katherine cried happy tears watching her firstborn son pledge his life to a sweet-faced girl who clearly adored him. James and Lucy built a small house on the ranch property, and James continued working with Daniel to manage the cattle operation, which now numbered nearly 200 head. May surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to attend art school in Santa Fe. It was a bold choice, unusual for a ranch girl, but Katherine and Daniel supported her dream. They helped her apply and were thrilled when she was accepted. In September, they took her to Santa Fe and settled her into a boarding house near the school, and Katherine cried different tears watching her quiet daughter step into a new future. Clara was 15 now and finally beginning to show interest in things besides horses and adventure. She had developed a friendship with the new schoolteacher's son, a studious boy named Paul who seemed to bring out a softer side of her wild daughter. Katherine watched the developing romance with amusement and recognition, remembering her own youth and the feeling of first love. Thomas was 2.5, a bright, cheerful child who followed his father everywhere and chattered constantly. He was too young to understand where May had gone, and he asked for his sister often, missing her presence. Life continued its steady rhythm. Seasons changed, cattle were born and sold, fences needed mending and hay needed cutting, and 1,000 other tasks filled their days. Katherine was 47 now, feeling the weight of the years in her joints on cold mornings, but still strong and capable. Daniel was 49, his dark hair now more gray than black, but still the same man who had watched her churn butter all those years ago. In the fall of 1902, Lucy gave birth to Katherine and Daniel's first grandchild, a beautiful baby girl they named Katherine after her grandmother. Holding her tiny namesake, Katherine felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both strange and wonderful. She had gone from churning butter alone before dawn to this. Grandmother, wife, mother, rancher, all the pieces of herself fitting together into a life she could never have imagined when she was a girl. "We are grandparents," she said to Daniel that night, still marveling at it. "We are ancient," Daniel joked, but his eyes were soft. "And it is wonderful." May came home for Christmas that year, full of stories about art school and the exciting world she had discovered in Santa Fe. She had grown sophisticated, Katherine thought, polished in a way that came from education and exposure to culture. But underneath, she was still their May, quiet and observant and thoughtful. The whole family gathered for Christmas dinner in the house that Katherine and Daniel had built over 20 years ago. James and Lucy with baby Katherine, May home from school, Clara and her Paul who had been invited to join them, Thomas, now 3, excited about everything, and Katherine and Daniel at the head of the table, watching their family with pride and gratitude. "I would like to make a toast," Daniel said, standing with his glass raised. "To family, to the future, and to the woman who made it all possible. Katherine, you said yes to a crazy cowboy 24 years ago, and you have been saying yes to building this life with me every day since. Everything good in my life comes from you and that choice you made. Thank you." To Katherine, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Katherine felt tears threaten but blinked them back, overwhelmed by love and happiness. This was it, she thought. This was everything she had ever wanted. Not perfection, but reality, messy and beautiful and real. The years of 1903 and 4 passed peacefully. James and Lucy had a second child, a son they named Daniel after his grandfather. May graduated from art school and decided to stay in Santa Fe, where she had been offered a position teaching art to younger students. She also had begun courting a fellow artist, a kind man named Robert Shaw who painted landscapes and seemed to understand her quiet nature. Clara married her Paul in 1905, a simple ceremony followed by a dance at the town hall. They moved to a small farm on the outskirts of Tucumcari, where Paul taught school and Clara raised chickens and a large garden. Thomas was 6 now, attending school in town and showing the same head for business that James had. Katherine was 51, Daniel 53, and they were adjusting to a quieter house now that all their older children were grown and gone. It was strange at first, having only Thomas at home, but they found they enjoyed the relative peace, the ability to focus on each other again the way they had in the early days. On a September morning in 1906, 28 years after they first met, Katherine woke before dawn and went to make breakfast. But when she came into the kitchen, she found Daniel already there, and he had brought up from the cellar the old butter churn that Katherine had not used in years. "What is this?" she asked, surprised. "I thought maybe you could show me how," Daniel said. "I have watched you churn butter for 28 years, but I never learned to do it myself. Seems like something I should know." Katherine laughed, delighted and touched by the gesture. "You want to learn to churn butter? I want to do it with you," Daniel said, "like we do everything else. Together." So in the pre-dawn darkness, with stars still visible through the kitchen window, Katherine taught Daniel to churn butter. She showed him the rhythm, the steady up and down, the way you could feel when the cream was beginning to turn. He was clumsy at first, making her laugh, but he persisted, and eventually he got the feel of it. "This is harder than it looks," he said, slightly out of breath. "Most worthwhile things are," Katherine replied. They worked together, taking turns with the dasher, talking about nothing in particular and everything important. They talked about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and their plans for the future, about how lucky they had been to find each other. When the butter finally formed, Daniel looked ridiculously pleased with himself, and Katherine kissed him there in the kitchen as the sun began to rise outside. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For asking me to churn a future with you. For meaning it. For building it with me every day for 28 years. Daniel pulled her close, holding her tight. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Best decision I ever made," Katherine said against his chest. They stood there together as the sun rose fully, flooding the kitchen with golden light, and Katherine thought about all the mornings they had seen together. All the sunrises over the ranch, all the quiet moments before the world woke up, all the years of building and growing and loving. This was what happily ever after looked like, she thought. Not a fairy tale ending but a real life, with work and worry and joy and love all mixed together. It looked like butter churned in the darkness and a cowboy who kept his promises. It looked like children and grandchildren, like a ranch built from nothing but determination, like two people who found each other and chose each other every day for 28 years. Thomas came into the kitchen then, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and the spell of the moment broke. But it did not matter. They had thousands of these moments, had built a life full of them, and would continue building for as long as they had. "Good morning, son," Daniel said, ruffling Thomas's hair. "Good morning, Papa. Good morning, Mama. What smells so good?" "Fresh butter," Katherine said, spreading some on a piece of bread for him. "Your father made it." "Papa made butter." Thomas looked incredulous, making them both laugh. "I did," Daniel said proudly. "And it is good butter too, if I say so myself." They sat together at the kitchen table, the three of them, eating fresh bread with fresh butter as the sun rose outside. It was an ordinary moment, one of thousands they had shared, but Katherine held on to it anyway, knowing that ordinary moments were what life was made of. The years continued to pass in that steady, inexorable way they do. May married her Robert in 1907 and continued teaching art in Santa Fe. James and Lucy had 2 more children, filling their house with noise and activity. Clara and Paul welcomed their first child, a daughter, in 1908. Thomas grew from boy to young man, tall and serious like his father, with his mother's green eyes and quick mind. Katherine and Daniel grew older together, silver hair and lined faces, bodies that no longer moved quite as easily as they once had. But their love remained constant, deepening with each passing year, rooted in the foundation they had built together. In the spring of 1910, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch. It was a beautiful day, warm and sunny, and they ate outside at long tables set up in the yard. There were toasts and speeches, laughter and tears, the whole messy, wonderful reality of a large family coming together. That evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Katherine and Daniel sat together on the porch, exhausted but happy. 30 years, Katherine said, marveling at it. Where did the time go? Into building this, Daniel said, gesturing at the house, the barns, the land stretching out around them. Into raising them. He nodded toward the house where Thomas was sleeping and where, in the smaller house nearby, James's family slept. Into loving you. I would do it all again, Katherine said. Every moment, every choice, everything that brought us here. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, Katherine said, because they taught us how strong we are together, how much we can endure when we endure it together. Daniel took her hand, his calloused palm rough against hers, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the land they loved. I am 60 years old, Daniel said after a while. I wake up some mornings and cannot believe I am that old. But then I see you and I remember that we got old together, and that makes it all right. We are not that old, Katherine protested, though at 56 she felt it some days. We have years yet. Years to keep building, Daniel agreed. Years to watch our grandchildren grow. Years to sit on this porch and count our blessings. And they did have years, good years full of the ordinary joys and sorrows that make up a life. Thomas went to university in Albuquerque, studying business, and came back to help expand the ranch operation. Grandchildren grew and new grandchildren were born, until Katherine lost count of how many there were and had to start writing them down. The ranch prospered, weathering economic ups and downs, drought and good rainfall, all the uncertainties of a life tied to the land. On a morning in September of 1918, 40 years after they first met, Katherine woke before dawn as always and went to churn butter, a practice she had returned to in recent years because it felt right, this connection to that first morning. But this time, Daniel did not just watch. He joined her, as he had done since that morning 12 years ago, and they worked together in the comfortable silence of long partnership. 40 years, Daniel said quietly, echoing her thoughts. 40 years, Katherine agreed. And I would not change a single one of them. Liar, Daniel said affectionately. You would change plenty. That winter when Clara had pneumonia, the year the drought killed half our herd, the time James broke his arm. All right, I would change some things, Katherine admitted. But not the important things. Not you, not us, not the choice I made to say yes to a crazy cowboy who asked me to churn a future with him. Daniel smiled, the same smile that had caught her heart 40 years ago, just a bit more weathered now. Best words I ever spoke. Best words I ever heard, Katherine replied. The sun rose as they finished the butter, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of gold and pink and orange. Another sunrise in a life full of them. Katherine looked at Daniel, at his lined face and silver hair and the hands that had worked beside hers for 40 years, and she felt overwhelming gratitude for every moment, every choice, every ordinary day that had brought them here. This was their future, the one they had churned together from that very first morning. Not perfect but real, not easy but worthwhile, not a fairy tale but something better. A true story of love and partnership and two people who found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. Thomas appeared in the doorway, now a man of 19 and capable of running the ranch himself when needed. Behind him came James, still living on the property with Lucy and their grown children. And beyond, Katherine knew, were May in Santa Fe and Clara in town, all of them connected by the bonds of family and love and shared history. "Are you two going to stand there all morning?" Thomas asked with a grin. "Or are we going to get some breakfast?" "Breakfast," Katherine said, laughing. "Come on, Daniel, we have people to feed." "As always," Daniel said, taking her hand as they turned toward the house. And that was the truth of it, Katherine thought as she went inside with her family. The life they had built was full of people to feed and care for, full of work to be done and love to be given, full of ordinary moments that added up to something extraordinary. It was a life churned from butter and dreams, from hard work and hope, from a crazy cowboy's strange words and a lonely woman's brave choice. It was, in short, exactly the future they had asked for, built together one day at a time, and Katherine could not imagine anything more perfect. The years of 1918 through 1920 brought changes to the world beyond their ranch. The Great War ended, bringing relief and celebration. The country was changing rapidly, automobiles becoming common, electricity reaching even Tucumcari. But on the Zimmerman ranch, some things remained constant. The work of caring for cattle, the rhythms of seasons, the bond between Katherine and Daniel that only grew stronger with time. In 1921, they celebrated another milestone. Thomas married a smart young woman named Alice Crawford, a teacher from Albuquerque whom he had met at university. The wedding was held at the ranch on a beautiful June day, and Katherine watched her youngest son pledge his life to his love and thought about the circle of it all, how life continued its patterns through generations. James and Lucy's oldest, Katherine, was now 19 herself and engaged to a rancher's son from a neighboring property. May's children with Robert were growing up in Santa Fe, exposed to art and culture. Clara's 3 children ran wild on their farm much as their mother had on the ranch. The family tree kept expanding, branches reaching out in all directions, all rooted in the foundation that Katherine and Daniel had laid 43 years ago. That fall, Daniel had a health scare, a pain in his chest that frightened them both. The doctor in Tucumcari said his heart was strained, told him to slow down, work less, let the younger men handle more of the physical labor. Daniel chafed at the restrictions, hating to admit that at 70 he could no longer do everything he once could. But Katherine was there, as she had always been, supporting and encouraging and helping him adjust to this new reality. They walked together in the evenings instead of Daniel riding out to check fences. They sat together on the porch more, watching their grandchildren and great-grandchildren play in the yard. They talked about their life, remembering stories and moments, building a shared history that felt precious now in a way it had not when they were younger and thought they had endless time. "I am not ready to be done yet," Daniel said one evening, his voice rough with emotion. "There is still so much I want to do, so much I want to see." "Then we will do it together," Katherine said firmly. "Whatever time we have, we will use it well," and they did. Daniel followed doctor's orders, took it easier, and his heart stabilized. They found a new rhythm, one that involved less physical labor and more enjoyment of what they had built. They traveled a bit, taking the automobile that Thomas had bought and visiting May in Santa Fe, spending time with all their scattered children and grandchildren. In the summer of 1923, they planned a large family reunion at the ranch to celebrate their 45th wedding anniversary. Everyone came: James and Lucy with their 4 children and 3 grandchildren, May and Robert with their 2 children, Clara and Paul with their 3 children, Thomas and Alice with their first baby, a son they had named Daniel after his grandfather. The house and grounds were full of people, 3 generations of Zimmermans, all of them connected by the love story that had started with butter and dawn and strange, beautiful words. At dinner that night, surrounded by family, Daniel stood to make a toast. He was frailer than he once had been, but his voice was still strong when he spoke. 45 years ago, I married the woman who changed my life, he said, looking at Katherine. I was a lonely cowboy with nothing but dreams and a little saved money. She was a brave woman who took a chance on me. Together, we built all of this. He gestured around the table at the faces watching him. Every person at this table exists because Kate said yes to a crazy proposition from a stranger, because she believed in the possibility of a future when all I had to offer was words and determination. He paused, emotion thick in his throat. I have tried every day for 45 years to be worthy of that yes, to build a life that justified her faith in me. I hope I have succeeded. I hope when you look at your lives at this ranch, at the opportunities you have had, you understand that it all started with love, with choosing each other and choosing to work together and choosing every single day to keep building that future. There were tears around the table, and Katherine was crying too, moved by his words and the truth of them. She stood, went to him, and took his hand. You have succeeded beyond anything I imagined, she said. You gave me the life I wanted, the partnership I needed, the love I deserved. Everything good in my life has your fingerprints on it. I would say yes to you again, Daniel Zimmerman. Every time, I would say yes. They kissed then, surrounded by the family they had created, and Katherine heard Thomas start singing the anniversary song. Soon everyone joined in, voices raised in celebration, and Katherine thought that this was what happily ever after sounded like. Not perfect harmony, but real voices, each unique and important, all coming together to create something beautiful. The celebration went late into the night, children eventually falling asleep in various corners, adults talking and laughing and sharing stories. Katherine moved among them, her family, marveling at how much love could grow from one morning's choice, one brave decision to believe in possibility. When everyone had finally gone to bed or home, Katherine and Daniel sat alone on the porch under the stars as they had done countless times before. Tired? Daniel asked. Exhausted, Katherine admitted. But happy, so happy. Me too, Daniel said. He was quiet for a moment, then added, Thank you, Kate, for 45 years of happiness, for this family, for saying yes. Thank you for asking, Katherine replied. Thank you for seeing me that morning and saying those crazy, wonderful words. Thank you for meaning them. They sat in silence, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. Katherine thought about that girl she had been, churning butter alone in the darkness, lonely and wondering if her life would ever be more than work and solitude. She thought about the woman she had become, surrounded by love and family, tired and old but satisfied in a way that young Katherine had never imagined possible. You remember what you said to me that first morning? Katherine asked. After you proposed that strange proposal. Tell me, Daniel said. You said, then we are crazy together and maybe that is the sanest thing either of us has done in a long time. You were right. Saying yes to you was the sanest thing I ever did. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. Asking you was the sanest thing I ever did. Everything good in my life flows from that moment. The autumn of 1923 brought another challenge. Katherine developed a persistent cough that would not go away, and the doctor diagnosed her with pneumonia. She was 69 years old, and pneumonia at that age was serious. For several weeks she was bedridden, weak and feverish, and Daniel rarely left her side. He sat with her through the long nights, cooling her fever, bringing her water, holding her hand when the coughing fits were bad. Their children took turns visiting, bringing food and help, worried about their mother. But Katherine fought through it, aided by Daniel's steady presence and the same stubborn strength that had sustained her through 45 years of building a life on hard land. When she finally turned the corner and began to recover, Daniel cried tears of relief. I was so scared, he admitted. I am not ready to lose you, not yet, not ever. I am not going anywhere, Katherine said, her voice still raspy but determined. We have more sunrises to see together. Her recovery was slow, taking most of the winter, but by spring of 1924 she was back on her feet, if not quite as strong as before. She and Daniel adjusted again, learning new limits, finding new ways to be together. They spent more time sitting, talking, remembering. They wrote letters to their children and grandchildren, wanting to pass on family stories, lessons learned, wisdom gained from a lifetime of partnership. In the summer of 1925, they sat together on the porch one evening and Katherine said, "We are old." Daniel laughed. "Yes, we are. I am 73, you are 71. We are definitely old. But we are old together," Katherine said. "That makes it bearable." "Better than bearable," Daniel said. "I would not trade a single day of being old with you for all the youth in the world alone." They spent that summer and fall enjoying their family, their ranch, their life. They knew they were in the twilight years now. That time was precious in a way it had not been when they were younger. But they faced it as they had faced everything else, together. On a morning in late September of 1926, Katherine woke before dawn as always, 48 years after that first morning. She was slower now, her joints stiff, but she made her way to the kitchen and on impulse got out the butter churn. It took longer than it used to, required more rest, but she worked the dasher steadily, feeling the connection to that younger self who had done this work all those years ago. Daniel found her there as the sun rose, and without a word, he took over the churn, working it with practiced ease now. They had done this together so many times over the years that it required no discussion, just the comfortable partnership of long practice. When the butter formed, they made breakfast together, moving around each other in the kitchen with the coordination of people who had shared space for nearly half a century. Thomas and Alice, who lived in the main house with them now, came down to eat, and they sat together at the table as the sun streamed through the windows. "What are you two smiling about?" Thomas asked, noticing the looks passing between his parents. "Just remembering," Katherine said. "The beginning," Daniel added. Thomas had heard the story before many times, but he never tired of it. The tale of how his parents met, of strange words spoken in darkness, of a woman who took a chance and a man who meant what he said. It was the foundation story of their family, the moment everything began. After breakfast, Katherine and Daniel walked slowly out to look at the ranch, at the land they had worked for 48 years. The house had been expanded and updated, the barns rebuilt and modernized. The cattle operation was now run mostly by James and Thomas, but it was still theirs, the future they had churned together from nothing but hope and work. "Are you satisfied?" Katherine asked. Looking back at everything, are you satisfied with what we built? More than satisfied, Daniel said. Grateful, blessed, amazed that it turned out even better than I dreamed. Me too, Katherine said. They walked a little further, taking their time, and found themselves at the spot where the original cabin had stood, the first shelter on this land. There was a new building there now, a storage shed, but they remembered the cabin, remembered those first years of struggling and building and learning together. I love you, Daniel said suddenly, urgently. I need you to know that. After 48 years, I love you more than I did on our wedding day. You made my life meaningful, Kate. You made everything worthwhile. I love you too, Katherine said, tears in her eyes. You gave me the life I wanted, the partnership I needed, the love I deserved. I am so grateful I said yes. They held each other there, two old people on land they had tamed together, and the September sun warmed their shoulders as they stood in each other's arms. The years 1927 and 28 passed peacefully. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928 with another large family gathering, even bigger than the last. There were now 4 generations of Zimmermans, including several great-great-grandchildren, all descended from that morning when a cowboy appeared in the darkness and changed a woman's life with strange, beautiful words. At the celebration, they renewed their vows, standing together as they had 50 years before, promising again to love and honor each other for as long as they lived. There was not a dry eye in the place, and Katherine felt overwhelmed by the love surrounding them, by the tangible evidence of what they had built together. In the spring of 1929, Daniel's heart began to fail again. This time, the doctor was clear. There was little to be done. He was 77 years old, had lived a hard, full life, and his body was simply wearing out. He might have months or only weeks. They should prepare. Katherine refused to accept it at first, insisted there must be something, some treatment, some cure. But eventually she had to face reality. They had been given 51 years together, which was more than many people got. She needed to make the most of whatever time they had left. Daniel took the news with quiet acceptance. I am not afraid, he told Katherine. I have had a good life, a full life. I loved you and was loved by you. I saw our children grow and thrive. I built something that will last beyond me. What more could any man ask for? More time, Katherine said fiercely. I want more time with you. Then let's make the most of what we have, Daniel said, and they did. Despite his failing health, they spent every moment they could together. They sat on the porch and talked for hours, remembering stories, telling each other things they had never quite found the words for before. They looked through old photographs, tracing the passage of time in images. They received visits from all their children and grandchildren, and Daniel gave each one his blessing and his love. On a warm evening in June, as the sun set over the ranch, Daniel asked Katherine to churn butter with him one last time. She brought out the old churn, and together they worked it, slowly and carefully, making butter as they had done that very first morning 51 years ago. Churn a future with me, Daniel said softly, echoing those first words. I did, Katherine said through tears. I churned a beautiful future with you. No regrets, Daniel asked. Not a single one, Katherine said firmly. It was the best future I could have imagined. You kept your promise, Daniel Zimmerman. You gave me everything you said you would. That night, lying in bed together, Daniel held Katherine close and said, When I am gone, remember that I loved you until my last breath. Remember that you made my life complete. Remember that everything good I did was for you and with you. Stop talking like that, Katherine said, though she knew they had to have these conversations. You are not going anywhere yet. But 3 days later, on a peaceful morning with the sun streaming through their bedroom window, Daniel Zimmerman took his last breath. Katherine was beside him, holding his hand, and his last word was her name. The grief was enormous, overwhelming, a physical pain that took her breath away. For 51 years, Daniel had been her partner, her love, her other half. The world without him seemed impossible to navigate. But she had her children and grandchildren, had the ranch and the life they had built together. And slowly, painfully, she found a way to keep going. At the funeral, which brought what seemed like half of New Mexico to their ranch, Katherine stood and spoke about her husband. She told the story of how they met, of a cowboy's strange words and a woman's brave choice. She talked about 51 years of partnership, of work and love and building together. She cried, but she also smiled, because how could she not smile when talking about the man who had given her such a beautiful life? He asked me to churn a future with him, she told the gathered crowd. And we did. We churned it together every day for 51 years. It was hard work and good work and the best work of my life. I will miss him until my last breath, but I will never regret a single moment we had together. The months after Daniel's death were the hardest of Katherine's life. She was 75 years old and suddenly alone in a way she had not been since she was 24. The house felt too empty, the days too long, everything colored by Daniel's absence. But she had her family, and they rallied around her, making sure she was never alone for long. Thomas and Alice continued to live in the main house with her, running the ranch that Daniel had started and built. James came by nearly every day to check on her. May came up from Santa Fe and stayed for a month, drawing pictures of the ranch and her mother, preserving memories in art. Clara brought her grandchildren, and their noise and energy brought life back into the house. Slowly, Katherine found a new rhythm. She woke before dawn still, but now she churned butter alone, and sometimes she talked to Daniel as she worked, telling him about the family, about the ranch, about how much she missed him. She found comfort in the familiar routine, in maintaining the practices they had shared. She began writing down their story, wanting to make sure future generations knew how it all began. She wrote about that September morning in 1878, about strange words and brave choices and a life built together. She wrote about the challenges and joys, the ordinary moments and extraordinary love. She wanted her descendants to know that what they had was built on partnership and respect and choosing each other every day. On a morning in late September of 1930, Katherine woke before dawn on what would have been their 52nd anniversary. She was 76 years old now, had been without Daniel for over a year, and the grief had not lessened so much as become bearable. She missed him with every breath, but she had learned to carry that missing while still living. She went to churn butter as always, working in the darkness before the sun rose. And as she worked, she felt Daniel's presence almost tangibly, as if he were standing beside her watching as he had that first morning. I kept going, she told him, speaking aloud to the empty yard. Like you would have wanted, I kept living, kept loving our family, kept tending what we built. But I miss you, Daniel. I miss you so much. The sun rose as she finished the butter, painting the New Mexico sky in familiar shades of gold and pink. Katherine stood there watching it, remembering 51 years of sunrises shared with the man she loved, and she felt at peace in a way she had not since his death. She had been blessed, she thought. They had been given 51 years together, which was more than many people got. They had built a life, raised a family, created something that would last long after they were both gone. Their love story was not over just because Daniel was gone. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in the butter she still churned before dawn, in every choice they had made together. Thank you, she whispered to the rising sun, to Daniel's memory, to the life they had shared. "Thank you for asking me to churn a future with you. It was the best future I could have imagined." Katherine Norton Zimmerman lived 5 more years, surrounded by her loving family, tending the legacy she and Daniel had built. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in January of 1935, at the age of 80, with her children beside her. At her funeral, Thomas read from the pages she had written, telling the story of how his parents met, of a woman churning butter before dawn and a cowboy who said strange, beautiful words. He talked about their love, their partnership, their 51 years of building together. And he reminded everyone that the ranch they stood on, the family that surrounded them, all of it started with a choice, a brave decision to believe in possibility. Katherine and Daniel were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under cottonwood trees that Daniel had planted 50 years before. Their gravestone was simple, bearing their names and dates in one line. They churned a future together. The ranch continued, passed down through generations of Zimmermans, each one adding their own chapter to the story that had begun on a September morning in 1878. The boarding house in Tucumcari had long since been torn down, replaced by new buildings, but the land where Katherine and Daniel built their life remained in the family, a testament to what two people could create when they worked together. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, those who lived on the ranch said they could feel the presence of the couple who started it all. The woman churning butter in the darkness, and the cowboy who appeared out of nowhere with words that changed everything. It was a love story that had not ended with death, but continued on, living in the land and the family, and the choices that echoed through generations. It was a future churned together, built with work and hope and love, and it was exactly what they had both dreamed of on that first morning when their lives intersected and changed forever. A happy ending that was really a happy beginning, the start of something that would last far beyond their mortal years, a legacy of love that would never truly end.